Okay, Norma. So we've been talking about the core conditions, or leading up really to the six core conditions. We've been talking kind of around the Rogerian person-centered approach. And for this sort of bit of the session, what I wanted us to sort of take a look at was your overall view as a practicing person-centered counsellor of the core conditions, and what you want people to really know about this, because a lot of people do misunderstand um, a lot about what Rogers was saying, particularly around the core conditions.
Yeah.
And then secondly, to share a little bit further on empathy, because in our earlier parts we looked more at congruence and conditional positive regard. So if you can sort of pick it up from there, Norma.
Yeah.
Talk to me first about the core conditions.
Okay. Right, there's a misperception here because Rogers talked about 6 necessary and sufficient conditions that bring about change. Okay, now it's been the word or the term core conditions actually applies to the unconditional positive regard, the understanding, the acceptance, empathic understanding, and the congruence of the counsellor. Now, the core conditions was a term coined by Carkhuff, not by Rogers. Okay, and it led to a misunderstanding that it was those 3 conditions, although they're very important because they are the means through which the relationship evolves, but it was just those 3 conditions that led to change, and it's not. It's the whole package. It's the 6 of them. Okay, that first, the person, the client, and the counsellor in psychological contact, that the client is congruent, in a state of incongruence, that the counsellor, the therapist, is congruent, and so on. It is actually the 6. And then that the first one particularly, and the 6, and I'll come back to the 6 in a little while, they've sort of been forgotten, and there's been a real concentration on those 3. But Rogers never said it was just those 3, as important as they are. It's not those 3 that bring about psychological change and growth. It is the 6, right? It's the whole package. Okay, and I think that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and okay, so looking at that, just to sort of further explain it to the layperson,
Yes.
as such. So what's missing from the 3 ones that are commonly referred to are the 2 persons being in psychological contact. Yeah.
Yes.
In relation to the core conditions. The first person, the client, is in a state of incongruence. Then we go through the 3 sort of core conditions as they're commonly known, and then the 6th condition. So can you just say a little bit more about that 6th condition?
That one, the communication to the client of the therapist's empathic understanding and UPR is to a minimal degree achieved. Now, I think we've got to realise that as empathic and as accepting that the counsellor, the therapist, thinks they are, if the client doesn't perceive that, if the client doesn't get it, it's simply not working. And probably that makes it the most important condition of all. Yeah, if I am in the role of the client and I am trying to explain to my counsellor what's going on, I hear their response and I know, no, you're not getting it. You're really not getting it. Then it falls flat. We are at an impasse. Now, a good counsellor will actually recognise that there's been a break in understanding and say something like, I didn't quite get that, did I? And can, rework it. And I think sometimes even that recognition that actually I'm, for the client, oh, she's realising she didn't get it, and she's willing to say she got it wrong. He got it wrong. That's really helpful. Okay, so it doesn't completely break the relationship, but it can. It can. It's really, really important that the client knows that the counsellor has heard and understood and accepts what's being said. Okay.
So, as the counsellor, then, it just drawing from your own experience, in terms of how you communicate your understanding, is there anything that you would like people learning this to know in terms of the care that you take about how you communicate it back and check it out as such?
I simply sometimes just say, I work hard to really understand what the client is saying from their frame, from their
Mm-hmm.
way of viewing it. And I offer that understanding back. And sometimes I say, is that what you're saying? Have I got it right? And yeah, the client can go, yeah, that's it, exactly that, yeah, you are. Or they'll say something like, yeah, well, partly, but not quite, or no, you didn't. No, I think it all depends on the depth of trust as well that you have, and the depth of the relationship, that the client can actually say, no, you're not understanding me. No, if their locus of evaluation is so externalized that they're not able to say that, I need to be aware of perhaps some body language, some facial expression that shows me I haven't got it. And to be very aware, it's not just the words that the client is saying, it's their whole body that is letting me know if I'm right on the button or if I've missed it or if I've sidestepped it or whatever. So I'm always observing and being very cognizant of the whole of the client in front of me, not just the words that they're saying. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you're always focused on the message, really, not just the verbal message, but all the non-verbals
Yes.
coming off the client and getting a sense of that.
They can be quite subtle. They can be quite subtle. Yes.
Okay. So then let's think about empathy, empathic understanding. So we were already sort of acknowledging that there's not only got to be empathy, but there's got to be that sort of understanding and also the communication back to the client. So tell me a bit more about how it is that you think the role that empathy plays really in the therapy.
I think empathy is important, not just in the person-centered approach, but in any approach that a counsellor might use. It's not alien to any approach at all. It's essential. It's essential. But I think in a lot of approaches, it can be seen as more of a technique, a strategy to gain understanding. I mean, when I started my training, first of all, that's how I learned. I mean, empathy was broken down into a number of subsections. It was reflective listening, it was paraphrasing or summarizing, it was engaging in deeper and empathic understanding or immediacy. And each one of those sections had a specific purpose of gaining information, understanding from the client. And of course that worked. Of course it worked. It works perfectly well in many approaches. But I think for the person-centered counsellor, it becomes much, much more. It's more of an attitudinal quality, a willingness to really be open to enter fully and completely into the world of the client, into the client's subjective reality of what their world looks like, how they experience it. And I guess we could break it down into I'm reflecting feelings back or thoughts, or I'm understanding behavior. But for me, it's more of a quality of being with rather than doing empathy. I don't know if
And
there's any sense.
yeah. Well, why is it important, to get into that subjective experience of the client? Do you think why is that important for the client?
I think most of all because it helps them to know that they are truly listened to, but also it's a means of conveying the counsellor's acceptance, their unconditional positive regard of what it is that the client is saying to them or struggling to say to them. And it's there are levels of empathy, I think, when I am meeting a client for the first time, I will stay pretty close to what it is that the client is saying to me, perhaps using exactly the same words and the nuances. But as I get to know the client's story, backstory, I begin to see and to hear what it is that a client might not be saying, what they're only half hinting at, what is too painful for them. It's like the feeling is at the edge of their awareness. And I might tentatively just offer that understanding back to the client. Got to be very, very careful that it isn't too soon. It might not be too soon for me, but is that too soon? Am I going far too deep, too quickly for the client at their stage of understanding and development? So empathy for me as a person-centered counsellor is more following what it is that I'm hearing from the client. Hearing,
And,
noticing, experiencing.
and again, just sort of, pursuing the why question a bit more, why is it important that somebody does kind of mirror those feelings, those issues, both surface and below the surface,
Yeah.
back to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, just say a bit about.
I've been thinking about that and trying to formulate a sort of definition, a description of it, but I kept on coming back to Rogers because, I mean, he was the one that really began to focus on empathy as being partly helpful in change. So I'm going to give you two quotes, if I might. One of when he offered empathy and when he was the recipient of it. And I think both of them really capture, or they capture for me, it might not be for the ones who's listening, but they really capture what you're asking here. And so the first one is when he's offering empathic understanding. And he says, when the other person is hurting, confused, troubled, anxious, alienated, terrified, or when he or she is doubtful of self-worth, uncertain as to identity, then understanding is called for. The sensitive companionship of an empathic stance provides illumination and healing. In such situations, deep understanding is, I believe, the most precious gift one can give to another. And that really sort of holds it for me. And it's how I've experienced it. In that relationship that I have with a client. And then he speaks of one who's been listened to. And he says, when I've been listened to and when I have been heard, I am able to reperceive my world in a new way and to go on. It is astonishing how elements that seem insoluble become soluble when someone listens, how confusions that seem irredeemable turn into relatively clear flowing streams when one is heard. I have deeply appreciated the times that I have experienced this sensitive, empathic, concentrated listening. I think for a lot of people, Amelia, their problems evolve from never really being listened to carefully, understood and accepted. And to find in your counsellor and your therapist that they are willing to do that provides them with such a freedom, a sense of belonging, you know, somebody cares, I matter to somebody. It's really, really very powerful.